last time we were in this building, Tim Spencer didn't have a beard. I don't remember that, but so I don't know if he's been growing it since then. I doubt it, but Donna Duncan, if you all remember her, was my boss back then, and we came down, and I'll tell you how long ago it's been. It's before charter schools were a thing, because Henry Webb and I spoke about charters and legislation that we thought would be coming up about charter schools. That's how long ago it's been. So then COVID happens, of course. We go through a couple commissioners, and we get a new one, of course, from this area, no less. And we had talked to him a little bit about getting back out and, just kind of spreading our wings a little bit and getting back on the road. Each office in our building is assigned to co-op. My office, that's Office of Finance Operations, we deal mostly with SCSC down in London. So we started there, went down to Ashland, and really it's been a good opportunity. But one thing we want to do, and on the tail end of this, we'll talk a little bit more about it, is talk about regional issues with SEEK and funding and things we've learned, things we probably need to unlearn, and then some of the statewide issues which are in alignment. But we did a survey a while back, got pretty good responses, and we would have asked regionally, what do you see as your top 5 issues, losing attendance and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Any point during the slides, if you have questions, just stop us. Pretty informal. You're not going to throw us off. If it's Jody Maggard asking questions, we don't answer his questions. But and of course, don't forget the sign-in thing. We'll make sure you get credit for suffering through this 3 hours of this stuff. So we're going to get started. I have with me Jessie Carlton, whose name's up there. She's our data controller. You'll see her pop in and out of some meetings virtually sometimes. She works very hard to make sure your all's data is not only correct, is that we're looking at it correctly and we understand it. Good and infinite campus knowledge and things like that, but also dealing with legislative requests. We just got one while we were sitting here. You can't block them quick enough when you get those messages, but she'll talk a little bit more and get a little more in depth about the data side of SEEK. That quality of data really pays off in the long run. We'll talk a lot about your attendance clerks, and these are people in your schools, but they bring a lot of money to your district. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. What am I doing wrong there? Oh, is it off? That would help. First thing is you turn it on. There we go. All right. So just at a high level, Kentucky public school funding, most everybody understands this at the highest level, federal, state, and local. Obviously, you all are very familiar with local. But one thing we always point out is your board has really one opportunity to turn the dial, and that's tax rates. That decision once a year is, it seems to be one of the most important decisions they'll make financially, short of their budget every year. The direction of the district, the wants and needs, the wish list, the things we'd love to do, they're all packed into that tax rate, or the things you can't do sometimes that you'd really like to do. And with that comes the responsibility of, answering to the community, not going crazy with tax rates. And some districts, if you look at as totality of the state, are very aggressive with tax rates. Some are pretty, what I call pretty sleepy with tax rates. They don't do 4% very often. On the way down here, I always see Beattyville, and I think of Lee County and Jim Evans. He would call me once a year and talk about how badly he wanted that 4% tax rate. And, I think next month, I believe we're going to be going to KSBA and sort of doing this, but one of the slides I'm going to drop on these board members is understanding, that 4% really doesn't go as far as you think. And there's a point for some districts, not all, that you got to stick your neck out a little bit further to get, facilities money, or if you want to do some general fund stuff, you're really going to have to kind of push your luck a little bit. And that can be tricky. Property assessments are way up. So anytime you nudge those rates up, people are going to pay a significant amount of money, and all of a sudden the focus turns back on your board members. Election time comes, the next thing you know, you get some people who aren't a fan of increasing taxes. So very important part of the funding. Of course, my folks the staff still do tax rates with you all every year. It's a very important part of the process that I've worked on for, I don't know how many, 15, 16 years now. And, we've kind of seen everything. We've seen Fayette County be very aggressive with tax rates. And then some counties will, or independents even, with higher tax rates. It's a hard sell. Frankfurt Independent, in my backyard, a lot of their property is exempt from taxes because state government owns half of downtown. That's a Frankfurt problem. And they've got a newer superintendent. She's not brand new, but that's a challenge that she's tried to deal with, and not successfully so far. And then some counties, you get a big new factory, you get an in lieu of check, but you don't get much else. So the biggest thing about local taxes is really looking around your community and understanding it. Economic development's important. Not giving away everything to get that economic development's really important too. And if you look around, we always joke driving around, there's so many Dollar Generals that, every community's got multiple Dollar Generals. Well, as they're popping up everywhere, or the next store, or whatever it is, that's tax base. And that can help pay those bills, of course. State funding, one that, I'm more familiar with, that we deal with the General Assembly, and ultimately they hold the purse strings, of course. And most people are familiar with that. Every 2 years we go through that same process of, here's what we really want, and here's what you're going to get. Sometimes it's close, sometimes it's not. When we did our London road show, we had legislators show up. Three of them, I think, one of which is a principal at a school district, a good background in this business. And, they talked about their challenges. And they also talked about, we tried to do this, or we wanted to do this. And they too have another responsibility in the state budget. They got to pay for corrections, Medicaid, roads, all these things. So education's a big chunk of that. And we'll talk about that dollar amount in a minute. But with respect to their work, we work pretty closely with them, and then they've got to determine, how can we fund K through 12. Also, the department's budget, which is small compared to the overall, we're pretty thinly staffed. There's not a whole lot of us left up there. You can come to our building and walk through. There's a lot of empty cubicles. And, when I first got to KD, we had a lot more people in our office, and you'd call and you get a call back within seconds. Now it may take a little bit longer, as just don't have as many people. And that's the way it is in state government. It's kind of the ebb and flow of state government. Federal money, of course, we're coming off of ESSER. Uncle Sam came to town with a big bucket of money. That's going to be a challenge for some districts. We're already starting to see it. We were given sort of a warning that some districts are going to struggle to kind of wean off of that or adjust their budgets. And we've got one that's, you could tell they're struggling a little bit because they did some staffing changes with ESSER money. But the big one there, really, nothing that's really, really new, with title programs, IDA, and things like that. And one question we haven't gotten a lot that we'll start to get, I think, is with the new president, what's going to happen with the U.S. Department of Ed. We simply don't know. Our general counsel statement was, we'll let you know when we hear something. That's basically what we know. We haven't heard much else. So now within KDE, and we also have Kentucky School for the Blind, Kentucky School for the Deaf fall under the department. Has been for many, many, many years, and 53 or so area technical centers, and that number changes. Part of our budget, too, is on behalf of retirement, health insurance, life insurance, et cetera. It's a big chunk of money the General Assembly sets aside for all those things as well. So federal grants, state grants, of course, SEEK, and then that local revenue comes into the picture. Now, obviously, we don't get your tax dollars. There is a local effort deduction, which we'll talk about in SEEK. So as property assessments grow, that reduction in SEEK occurs, and you get sort of less and less state money proportionally. And then your SBDMs, of course. So it's not overly complicated, but if you think about it, there's a whole lot of people involved in that. Your finance officer, your superintendents, your board members, your community, people in Frankfurt, people in DC. It really is a large group of people that eventually get all its funding to you all. We talk about revenue, and this changes pretty frequently over time. If you go back 5-10 years, the picture was quite a bit different. Federal revenue obviously is going to drop off a little bit in 23, and if we come back next year and update our slide, we should see a little bit more decline as time goes on in federal. SEEK tends to grow quite a bit, and what's interesting is, as we've lost ADA as a state, per pupil can go up a little bit. You can kind of keep it about the same. And, give or take $100, $200, $300 million, it grows a little bit at a time. There's a pretty good consistency with the per pupil amount the budget uses to determine SEEK. It's always gone up or stayed the same. I don't believe it's gone down in my career. I don't believe so. On behalf, again, that's that retirement health insurance stuff we were paying on behalf of school districts. That's a big chunk of money that we kind of tend to forget about. And some other state revenues, those are generally going to be state grants. But that local revenue, one reason it's underlined is the significance of that. Now, if you're looking at SEEK versus local revenue, that's a significant difference. But to be fair, the state's pitching in quite a bit of extra money there. But that local revenue is a huge, huge chunk of overall revenue. And that's one thing we like to point out when we're meeting with new General Assembly members is it's not just state money. It's not, all this state effort. There's a lot of local effort. And these decisions every year, July, August, September, your board rather is making that decision. That adds up pretty quickly. So that's how much effort locally is put into this. So right now we're a hair above $11 billion if you do the math, which is pretty significant. All that started, of course, Kara, a lot of you all are aware of this. Our former Associate Commissioner, Robin Kinney, who was then interim commissioner, she was actually a law clerk for the judge on this decision. And so she had a little bit different perspective of this case. About 1990, 91, you saw this change. That's where SEEK came out of. And if you go back and can ever read a few articles online about the history of it, you'll notice that there really wasn't. Kentucky was sort of ahead of a curve, and other states started to look at us too. And I think they still do. There's a lot of different funding formulas. You'll look at other states. Tennessee just redid theirs 2 or 3 years ago. But we noticed it looks a lot like ours in some respects, and there's some stuff in there that's rather interesting that we liked that they did. So we look at other states and say, could we ever do that? And we'll get to that towards the end here, but this is a very important court case, kind of set us off on a different path as a state. And basically, SEEK starts with that base money. It's like the core part of it. There's that per pupil amount that's set. There's usually 2 amounts of the budget bill. And generally speaking, we'll start working on the state budget this fall, about September, and we'll get data together, and we'll talk a little bit more. The Office of State Budget Director and KDE will get together and estimate assessments, property assessments rather, ADA, free lunch students, exceptional child count, limited English proficiency students, and we'll do those statewide. And we're not really concerned if we're right in Perry County and right in Hazard and right in Pike. We're concerned if we're right in the total, if we have enough room in there. If we're right, it makes us look really good. If we're wrong, not so good. So we work really hard with 2 economists to make sure these numbers are pretty tight. And to give you an idea, this year's property assessments we were within $1 billion, which is like 0.27%. And they estimated that a long time ago. So pretty sharp guys that do that. They do a pretty good job. So that part of it, that average daily attendance, we're going to use to kind of build this base dollar amount in your SEEK funding formula. Obviously, that number, as it goes up, if your ADA stays the same, you're going to get quite a bit more money. Or if your ADA goes up and that goes up, it's kind of a winning formula to get quite a bit more money. And then right now we're sitting at 4,326, but that's not the full story, of course. So you look at all the add-ons that go in that formula. Free lunch is a big one. Thanks. This warm weather is really doing great for my throat. Excuse me. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that average daily membership of free lunch, and going way back, I guess when I first got to KD, one of the more interesting numbers is if you look at that statewide count, about 370,000, that's quite a bit over half of our students. And you all know this a lot better than we do. A lot of districts run at 90+% free lunch. And you go across the state, you'll see some 50s and 60%. Jefferson County's got a pretty high percentage too. This is a very important source of funding because it recognizes that those students may need some additional supports, and 233 million, or about $650 per student, come to your district to do that. Now, that money's not intended to feed them. It's obviously intended to provide more supports for those students. And one thing we look at in other states is how do they do their, free and reduced. Of course, the feds do what the feds do. A lot of districts are 100% free lunch. But to me, this is such a large group of our kids that focus should always be there. That, if you can, do anything, this is a great spot to do it because it impacts a whole lot of kids. Exceptional is another bucket of money. And as you can see, it's about $500 million, and that grows very quickly. This is a pretty expensive add-on. And whenever we predict this number, we're usually way off. It's a hard number to pin down because it tends to grow fast while the general population of students is going down. So during COVID, of course, all the data's frozen. We're all waiting and waiting. This number kept growing. And there's different answers why. There's different theories. But generally, when you're talking just the financial side, severe students over 10 grand, 5,000 for the moderate group, and about 1,000 for the speech kids. Speech kids obviously come on and come off. They kind of recycle, if you will. But overall, $500 million of SEEK is exceptional. And if you really dig into it and you look at what you actually spend in your districts on this, it's well over double that. So this is a huge chunk of that. If you go back to that slide with $11 billion, this is a good chunk of that right there. Probably, I would guess, thanks, sir, about $1 billion if you did the math on exceptional. So recently you got an email, I think, or on a call with Commissioner Fletcher about a potential shortfall in SEEK. We'll talk a lot more about that. And we'll also blame Jesse for that. But part of that is the way we estimate exceptional child count. And like I said, it's a hard number to pin down. And if you're off for severe or moderate, it gets, obviously adds up pretty quickly. So we pay a lot of attention to that count. We talk to Jefferson County and Fayette. They tend to add more than anybody else. And we'll also look regionally, and if we see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% gains in area, in districts, we'll talk to their SPED directors to learn more about why, so we can, somewhat intelligently understand that data a little better. Home hospital, this isn't a big pot of money, but obviously these are those students who can't attend school. Districts provide those services at home or in the hospital. And we'll do a little pop quiz, and I'm going to exclude Jody Maggard because he probably knows this answer. But does anyone know why that amount is $4,226? So that's base minus $100. Does anyone know why? Anybody? Jody, do you know? There you go, capital outlay. I was going to say I'll give away a gift card, but I knew you'd know that. So, but yeah, it's less capital outlay. So you don't need the quote building money, so you get that. That same student also generates SEEK funding through the ADA. So it's kind of a, if you will, double, close to double, I guess. Limited English, we have pockets of this. So you'll see Warren County and Bowling Green, tons of limited English kids. Jefferson County has something like over 80 languages in their district. So this is kind of a regional, and you'll see most districts have a handful, if that, but you get to Woodford, Shelby, Jefferson, Fayette, you'll have a larger population. We've been getting questions on this one lately about breaking it up like exceptional. So there's different categories depending on their level of limitation, I guess, or how proficient they are, and there's some testing. So I think that's going to be coming up, maybe not this session, maybe the next. But anytime the General Assembly asks questions, we're very happy they're at least looking at it, seeing if they could do something a little different. Turn it off again. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So this is one of the reports we publish online, and it's got a lot of stuff on it. But one reason this is a little bit older, but in the upper left, a quick read of this. Upper left is all data that goes in. So think of it like ingredients. The big middle box is just the math of getting to that dollar amount. The far right, ignore it. Don't pay any attention to it. because it's the same thing as the middle, just cut up a little differently. And then the bottom left are some facilities funding, nickels that you'll hear us talk about quite a bit. But what's important about this report is that upper left, your data throughout the cycle of SEEK. We do a forecast, which is, I think, still open today for next year. Then as the data gets more and more populated, we start to get it in late summer. We'll build tentative SEEK late September. And then, like the status we're in right now, we're trying to finish final SEEK by March 1. And that will slowly but surely, we get all the actual data and we type some loose ends, and we'll get final SEEK out there, and that determines your payments for the last 3 months of the fiscal year. Knowing this data at the district level and knowing what should be there is really important, which Jesse will talk about the quality. What did I do? It's on. Oh, it's on? All right. So I keep turning it off. All right. So one thing we always point out, and it's interesting depending on where we are, if we're in Ashland, Murray, or wherever. If you show, that's Anderson County next door to where I live. And you look at certain things like local effort. Right in the middle, about halfway down there, 6.4 million, or about 1,949 per student or ADA. We go to Wolfe County, it's less than half that. But we also talk about, Wolfe County's tax base, Anderson County's tax base. So comparing districts is really difficult. That property assessment plays a big role in how a district can generate local money, and how they, frankly, cannot. I always say there's a natural line, and I don't know where it is in every community, but most boards have figured it out. If you try to do too much, your community is really going to come after you. And if you don't do enough, your bottom line is really going to suffer. And the hard times are much harder. And the good times are even hard because you just don't have much of a tax base. But the one important thing, too, is one thing that the state looks at. When I say the state, that's KDE, is that per pupil assessment in the upper left determines a lot of the funding. So the less property wealthy you are, you're going to pull more nickel equalization money in, more tier 1 typically, and as well as the funding formula there's more state money, kind of the table gets a little slanted your way and you get a little more money that way. Because Anderson's at 649,000, Wolf's at 255. Wolf proportionally is going to get a little bit more. If you look at their nickel equalization, they put in 150,000, they get back 440. And there it is. Anderson puts in $1 million, gets back 600,000. So that property assessment helps determine that, and it's a huge, huge thing to pay attention to. The last couple of years, we've seen kind of a weird thing happen in Northern Kentucky. Some of their property assessments are going up 33, 28% in 1 year, which is, absurd to think back that 4% was pretty high back in the day. And in other areas of the state aren't seeing that at all. So it depends on where you are. We also pay close attention to where there's big economic development, like Glendale outside E-Town. Big battery plant, property assessments are probably going to go through the roof. They were pretty healthy there anyway. Bowling Green, of course, areas of Jefferson County. But that impacts a lot of that funding tremendously. So when we talk about that local effort, and that's a deduction out of SEEK, this is something we always take with us to our board members or to General Assembly. Talk about if you had 2 kids in random districts, it's kind of that your mileage may vary. One student in a district, local effort's a little bit smaller. He's a free lunch student. They get tier 1 funding. But the bottom line is the District B, in this case, generates a lot more taxes and has had maybe a much more aggressive tax policy over time. So that student's $9,531 versus the $6,300 or so for another district. So if you randomly pluck 20, 25 kids out of random districts, we jumped into Barberville and then went over to Graves County and Ballard County and Fayette County and Beechwood. It's all different math. And that's what makes this formula what it is. But at the same time, it can frustrate districts because they may not be generating nearly what their neighbors do because of higher taxes or lower taxes. And so that tax base, and this is something we talk to boards about, that decision they make every year gets right into that bottom number and becomes very, very important, not only to pay the bills, but sort of, do things the district wants to do, or pay for, all kinds of things, additional staffing, buses, you name it. So to me, this kind of sums up SEEK. If you had to put it in a really short slide, this is about it. The local effort to me is one of the biggest things ever in this formula. So when we talk about open enrollment, I think Jesse's going to pick up from here, I believe. You want that?
Sure, I'll try it. Morning, everybody. As Chase said, my name is Jesse Carlton. I help out with data in Office of Finance and Operations, and they've sent me on these road shows to help me because Chase started blaming me for a bunch of stuff. So I'm here to defend myself on part of it too. So open enrollment for students. This is House Bill 563 from a couple of years ago. Really, before we start talking about the data, we want to start talking about these open enrollment students to make sure everybody understands and we're all on the same page. A lot of times when this came out, there were lots of districts who were, very excited about this. Just want to make sure we're cautioning everybody to understand what you're getting with these open enrollment students, okay? First question we always ask is, are you dependent upon those? There's a lot to think about from a student who's coming outside of your district. Tax base, what you're paying, what do they generate for you? How much do they cost versus what they generate? Are your taxpayers subsidizing a huge number of kids coming from an outside district that you're not receiving that tax base for? Second question after open enrollment is always, can I charge tuition? KDE's stance right now has been no. As we stand and say this, we've said it the last 2 times we've done this, you cannot charge tuition. And immediately somebody's like, I know you have somebody probably very near you, beside you. It may be you, but KDE's stance is that you aren't supposed to be charging tuition for these students. And the other big thing is once you accept these students, they're your students for the year, okay? To educate and to, for lack of a better word, deal with as same way as all of your other students, right? If you have a student who has come in who has caused some type of problem, they need to go through all of the same suspension, expulsion, any of that. There is a big issue right now with a lot of people, trying to flow in and out, back and forth. Now, that's hard for us at KDE because we have nothing that shows when a student is, quote, sent back. Okay, we can see that the student leaves, but that is also their right. If I send my kids to the district over, we get halfway through the year and I say this is not working and I want to pull them back, I can do that as a parent, but the school system should not send them back. Okay, so and there's nothing on our side to see what's making that happen. But so trying to get the word out there, they're yours for the year. We're trying to look into some maybe other situations where there may be virtual programs that are letting students wander in and out. So we know there's an issue. Let's see where we go. Okay, now we're going to jump into some of, hopefully your eyes don't glaze over on me for talking about some data. We do a presentation, the Student Tracking and Data Branch in District Support does a presentation called Data and Money. And if you've been in that, you're going to see a lot of the same slides. There's a lot of data points that go into SEEK from the student side. Most, if not all of those, are housed in Infinite Campus. So we're going to run down through those. I'm going to try not to get really deep into the weeds, but want to make sure everybody understands how important they are and where they come from. You have stuff that you can control, data points you can control in Infinite Campus. You also have a lot of things you can't control. Chase talked about some of that local effort, nickels, other things. So the places you can help yourself, that's where we want you to help yourself. One of the big major components is ADA, that average daily attendance that's going to come out of Infinite Campus. We're also going to talk about the other add-ons that come out of Infinite Campus, depending on, what Shay went through, those students and the other money that they generate for you. All of this is district controlled, tracked in Infinite Campus. Proper tracking is going to maximize that funding. Okay. Shay talked earlier about your attendance clerks. We talk a lot about attendance clerks in Infinite Campus training. A lot of times they are some of your lowest paid employees in your district, and they hold the keys to a lot of your funding. Okay. We're going to talk about ADA, check-ins, check-outs. There's a lot of timing and training for your attendance clerks that can, save you and create for you a lot of money. Okay, prior year, end of the school year, ADA growth. These are all built into the SEEK system. Shay will probably jump in here and there on me as we talk through this. End of the year, SAR comes through, superintendent approves it. There's also growth factor, January growth factor that are worked into the formula. Fall growth is the second month. January growth factor, you can pick the 5th or 6th month to see if there's been any growth since fall. All of this data, this ADA data, is pulled out of Infinite Campus, and it is reported through a SAR application, okay? Growth factor, SAR, January growth factor, all reported in the same place. About 2 years ago, I think, we rolled out a new SAR application. It's through the KDE apps. Kind of beefed it up a little bit. It used to be kind of a back and forth via emails with, DPP signing off on it, superintendent saying, yes, I agree with this number. It's all online now, and we're hoping that it connects more people within the district, to be honest, because there's also a place that finance officers can have access to this SAR system now. There's reports in there that we're going to talk about. It kind of gives you a little bit more control, and not control of your data, but you can see it a little bit better. We're encouraging, if you do not have a login to your district and you are a superintendent, a DPP, or a finance officer, reach out to me, reach out to Laura Lohman, who manages this. We'll make sure we get you in and get you access, because a lot of what we're going to show, there's reports in there that you can see if something's looking wrong on the data side. Remember that when you all submit this to us, you're signing off on it. We're looking at it, but we're looking at 171 districts. You all are looking at your district, okay? So we can see big fluctuations that say, hey, something's wrong here. They had, 300 kids with a T1 code at this school last year, and this year they have 0, okay? That dings on our radar. We see that. But if you had a, 15% drop, you may have missed coding a classroom, and we won't necessarily see that when we look at a whole district. The bumps won't be quite as big. All right, this is the SAR application. When you go in, whatever is open at the time, SAR, growth factor, January growth factor, that'll be highlighted for you. You'll see the submission school year there. We've got a lot of reports in here that we encourage you to look at. Once you submit SAR, there's a window. There's a window where you have submitted it, and you can find an error, and we can get it back, and we can fix a lot, okay? Once we get 4, 5, 6 months down the road, and we start running transportation, we start running all of the data together with all of the other districts, it's a lot harder for us to walk it back. So we encourage districts, as we are, check out these reports after you submit your SAR. These reports are where you will see those fluctuations. We're hoping that before you run your data and submit it to us, we have all kinds of checklists. Check these reports, look at this data, make sure everything, is checking out on your end. Excuse me. But it happens. Things happen. We had a district this past year who submitted, DPP signed off, superintendent signed off, everybody was happy, everybody looked fine from our side. We got 2 months down the road, and they figured out their entire virtual class, which held 30 kids, they didn't put the grades on their final grades correctly. They were all performance-based students, and they got 0 funding for 30 kids because the grades weren't on right, okay? So in those cases, we joke that he's the softie. He is. he was like, we've got to fix this. And I'm like, Che, we have harped and presented and told people and said, you've got to put your grades here. You got to do this. You've got to do this. We talked to counselors. We talked to DPPs. We talked to everybody. And I'm like, they signed off on this, Che. They said it was good. And he's like, we're opening it back up. So they were lucky because they were 2 months in and we could open it back up. Had we ran transportation, Che, would you have let them open it back up? No. Okay. So these are the reports we want you to look at. These are the reports, and I don't have one here that'll show you. These are the reports that will show you at a school level, at a district level. My T1s have gone up. My T5s have gone down. Is this a coding issue? These are things that get rolled from one school to the next a lot of times that can get missed. And there are dips that you should see. You should see your T1s go down from 10th grade one year to 11th grade next year. Everybody's getting the license. Nobody's getting on the bus anymore, right? You will learn as you look at these reports, if you're looking at them, there are ebb and flows that you should see.
And there's generally that report, is I've probably looked at 1,000 of them, and I don't know your kids, I don't know your schools, but I can show you in 5 minutes what to look for on that report. And this is one that superintendents sign off on. And I know every one of you sit at home and look at it for days, and then you sign off on it. But in a few minutes, you can see a pattern. Did the fourth graders last year show up in fifth grade this year? Or, as we've seen, a whole third grade is missing from elementary school. And I think, did they get their license? No, they're gone. The clerk didn't put them in correctly. Something happened. And we'll get this August, sometime like in August. And then fall is a great time to look at it because there's plenty of time to fix it. No one's going to be, like looking over your shoulder. We don't call you every day. But about December, January, things get a little iffy if we can fix it. And once we run final seek, there's nothing to reopen it. The commissioner himself couldn't get us to reopen it. It's statutory. We have to be done. Payments are done. Everybody's done. So when you get that report, I think ADA is probably the big one. And then the T codes are really important. And if you're a small district, it'll take you about 32 seconds to look at that report. I still don't know how JCPS looks at theirs with the number of kids they have, but you'll see it. Last year's fourth grade, yep, looks pretty close. And you keep looking at that pattern in your schools, and eventually it becomes kind of second nature. Or if you open a new school or change routes, that will jumble it up a little bit, but not too badly. And if you do build a new school and, yep, we opened it, you can expect to change your T codes a little bit. Unless you build, right next to the neighborhood where they all are, they're probably going to still have the same number of T1s and things like that. Go ahead.
All right. We're going to jump back to talking about some of this Infinite Campus data. The ADA data, it's used, it's calculated from data in Infinite Campus using check-ins and check-outs. We have a half-day, whole-day funding formula, which means if your student is there at least, I can do it better with absent. If your student is absent 35% or less of the day, you get a full-day funding. If they are absent 65% of the less of the day, you get a half-day funding, okay? So every minute that they are in your building is funding, is a little piece of calculation that goes into ADA that all tallies up at the end of the year, okay? So when I was talking about those attendance clerks back at the beginning, one of the things we harp on when we do DPTP trainings, when we do attendance clerk trainings, is every school in your district, the attendance clerk, that lady or gentleman who sits at the beginning, at the front of your school and buzzes people in and hands out Band-Aids and talks to the moms on the phone, who has a million different jobs, also has a job that directly ties to your funding. Okay. And every person, bless you, should also have on their desk, if they do attendance, the times for that school of when your half-day, whole-day time is, because everyone's is a little different. My intermediate school kid starts at, 8:01, but my high schoolers don't start until 8:05, which means their check-in, check-out, half-day, whole-day is going to be a couple minutes difference. If your attendance clerks don't have that, reach out to us. We can help them calculate that, okay? Because it's the difference in a half day or whole day funding. If I go to check out my kid and you call them on the intercom and they come, okay? It may take them, who knows how long to get there. They're still in your building. They're still finishing up a test. So we don't, we want these attendance clerks to be mindful of what that time is, because we're not trying to gotcha, we're trying to help you. And that's a lot of what our attendance audits are for. We have field staff, 3 field staff who work out of the student tracking and data branch. This side of the state, I believe you all have Sasha Reinhardt. If you've had an attendance audit in the last year or two, Sasha will be the one to have done it. A lot of times we say audits, reviews, people get nervous. The state's coming in. These attendance clerks, get very nervous. We don't want you to be nervous. This isn't a financial audit. We talk about those people on the other side of the wall at KDE who do the financial audits. They're trying to make sure everything is right, okay? Our attendance audit crew, we are working as much to make sure we are getting you all the money you need as we are to find errors. More times than not, when we come in, we find more, hey, if you did this, it would get you more money. Then we find you're doing this wrong, you've got to stop, okay? So it's processes like make sure you know your check-in, check-out times, make sure you're properly tracking your home hospital students, make sure you haven't missed rolling T codes forward. So welcome, Sasha. Welcome, Ruth. Welcome, Becky. They're your attendance auditors. They do a lot of good, a lot of times too. Let's see. I think we're good there. Sorry. All right, Seek at Risk. We're going to start talking about some of these add-ons. The new SAR application system that's in green, after we got it going, we actually added Seek at Risk to it. It will also be where DPPs and superintendents sign off on these at-risk numbers. These are your free lunch only students, okay? A lot of times we talk about free and reduced lunch students. Seek at Risk is free lunch only. And this is a little bit different calculation. It's not an ADA, it's not an end of the year count, it's an ADM. So for any day that you have a free lunch student enrolled in your school, you're going to get credit for that at-risk student. There are cleanup reports in Infinite Campus. There's a lot of things. How many people, if you know, have you gone to the new statewide Mosaic system in your point of sales over on your food service side? Maybe, yes, no. So there's a new POS system. When it first rolled out, there were some, glitches going back and forth, making sure we got all of our free lunch students from Mosaic or whatever your food service is over into Infinite Campus. They've done a lot of work there. Things are looking pretty good from our side. Your direct certification students are going to be your biggest chunk of these students, okay? They're going to be your students who are eligible for Medicaid, SNAP, any of those programs that file is monthly loaded by somebody in your district and counted. If you are a CEP school, Community Eligibility Provision, which means everybody in your school gets free breakfast and lunch, don't have to fill out the form, okay, to have that. What you still need to do is you still need to fill out that household income form. And we know that's hard. This has been a big change that happened, I think, back in 13, 14, when that program came. That's an excellent program. Make sure everyone is receiving breakfast and lunch. It's great for the kids. It's hard for this data tracking, okay? Because it is very hard to explain to a parent, your student is going to get free breakfast and lunch, but I still need you to fill out this form to tell me your income, to still identify you so that the school gets this money over here, okay? A lot of districts have their Frisky help with this, the back to school events, which, paused during COVID are kind of getting back going now. That's a good way to get this data. This is, like I said, verified through the SAR application system. This is one of the ones that's a little harder to open. So make sure when you're signing off on this data, there's several reports. There's a Seek at Risk report in Infinite Campus that you can tell what you're signing off on. You'll work with Samantha Engstrom. It used to be just emails back and forth with her. Now it's through the system that we can verify who's signing off, and what your number is. Let's see. I think I've beat that one to death. All right. Oh, here's the reports I was talking about. It will show you at the very, very bottom what your number of your student count is and what that ADM is. It should be reasonable. You know, if you have 1,000 students, but your ADM is only 200, you've got, you know, something's wrong somewhere. You haven't uploaded a direct cert file. You know, it should make sense to you. Also, what we like to say about this report is be very careful about this report. To the right of those student IDs, blanked out, their student names. This is a report we don't want you kind of printing out and just leaving around. Reminder that free and reduced lunch data is very confidential. Be leery of who has access to this report and where it's going in your district. Here is where you will update it in the SAR application. There'll be a little verify number. Those two numbers right there, the student count and that district ADM, should be what you're seeing within your district. DPP, somebody else, food service director, whoever's in charge of this, will be able to verify that. This is on a week delay because it's so much data. So if you pull up at the first to verify this data and you're like, this is way off, and you go and fix all of your data, it will be the next Monday before this has been uploaded again and you have a new number in there, okay? So kind of helpful to know so you're not going crazy waiting for the number to show up. All right, exceptional child. This is another add-on. This is another data point that comes out of Infinite Campus. It is based on your December 1 child count. Okay, this is a number that is going to be pulled and submitted by your Director of Special Education. They deal with our Office of Special Education and Early Learning. They're in the middle of scrubbing this data now. I'm going to be honest, this was a very frustrating December 1 school year because December 1 fell on a Sunday. And not only did it fall on a Sunday, we can deal with it falling on a Saturday or Sunday. It fell on a Sunday and Thanksgiving was late. This happens once every 5 years. My plan is to be gone before it happens again because it is a pain because all of those students who are at your school for the last time on Tuesday, November 24th, and then don't show up anywhere again until Monday, December 2nd, technically do not have anywhere to land and any district to get credit for on the December 1, okay? So it's kind of a little anomaly. We're working, those students, I think what OSEAL does is they work with the two districts kind of who are wanting to claim the student, okay? And you work out where that student is going to land. Students in this count must have an active IEP that is locked in the system. There's several reports in Infinite Campus that'll show you this. And then here are your breakdowns. Che talked about how each of these breakdowns generate a different amount. If you're looking in the system and looking specifically at a student, you'll be able to tell what their diagnosis is and which category, for lack of a better word, they fall into. Anything else on here, Che? Nope. That's how much each generates. And like Chase said, these numbers, I haven't seen them decline since I've been at KDE.
No,
they go up.
They're pretty consistent. And even though we moved our budgeting model up to catch up, they still outpace our model. It's just a hard number to pin down. You'll see it come in waves in certain districts. We talked to, it's been, I'm going to say before COVID, we spoke with some districts. And one of the, I think, prevailing theories that we had heard more than once was sort of the opioid epidemic. Those children of the parents were now coming into the school districts. And of course, they were having some learning issues, et cetera. So they were now going to populate. Mike Borchers at Ludlow, that many of you all know, is former, I think, special ed person and then superintendent, now on our board. He and I have spoken at length about it. We also work with some districts like Jefferson because they have people that will model their own numbers to look out years from now to figure out, you know, is this number going to continue to grow? Because they obviously have their staffing concerns are a little different because they have to hire, 30 special ed people rather than 1 or 2 additional. And, As you all know, it's not going to surprise you, IEPs dictate everything, and not being very experienced in this. I have a family member that was a special ed director. She's like, it's a flip of a coin if it's a very light IEP or it's a very heavy IEP, and that cost that comes with it. This is one area, if you look at the totality of SEEK, this is one area I think getting the right people in the right room at the right time could really help push this forward to say, this is a big part of what we do every day is educate these children. But the cost, like I said, I guarantee you it's well over double what the state pays in, at least at this level. So I think that's a point that we'll get to at the end of this.
And that's what I was going to say. The last two road shows we have done, that's been a point that has come every time we've discussed this. That looks like a giant number right there, $10,000. A lot of times it doesn't come close to touching what the district is paying out. And especially when, you guys, where we are in the section of the state, you may not have a whole lot of people or a whole lot of students, that fall into a category that need certain, instructional help. Okay. But they're still your student to find. So, Jefferson County may have, a whole classroom of students who need, an occupational therapist for something, and for them to hire one, makes sense. If you have one student and you need an occupational therapist, it's a little bit harder if it's just one student in your district or a few students instead of a, larger group, and it's going to end up costing more. Okay. Home hospital. Come on, Tom. We good for a minute? Okay. We want a break? Or we want to roll? Chatty Cathy's. Very non-committal. I got yawns. Are we an hour yet? All right. 5:10? All right. We'll come back with home hospital. All right. Okay. I'm just going to jump in and start because I think that's the best option. I will say that while we were on a break, I did have a very good question brought up to me, and we can talk about it here before we go into home and hospital. I was asked, does it matter, our attendance clerks, how we're coding this, excused versus unexcused? From the state perspective, any absence is an absence. You're not there. Whether the district determines that it's an excused absence or an unexcused absence, the truth of it is we're not going to pay you for it. Now, excused or unexcused. Now, there are these very fancy things called exempt attendance codes. We're going to talk about one of them here for home hospital. An exempt attendance code is an EHO, a home hospital, something very specific, a field trip. There are very specific uses for exempt attendance codes because those are times when students are not in your building, but we will pay you for the student. Okay, so that's one of the things your attendance auditors will look at very closely. They will not look at how you're coding excused versus unexcused. That is your local board policy, whether you make an absence excused or unexcused. You can waive those. You can have as many as you want. Most districts put a cap on them so that people don't abuse them because they're not getting paid for either one of them. But we will look at those exempt codes because you're getting paid for when students are not there. So that it's a good question. Rolls right into these home hospital students. This is another add-on. Che talked about how you are in essence getting doubly funded for these students, okay? What happens is, I'm gonna check my slide here. Okay, so what's gonna happen is these are reported on your SAR as a separate group of students, but they will also be counted within your ADA for your regular student population. Home hospital students will have both an attendance group and attendance code in Infinite Campus. And I always get these backwards. The attendance code is the exempt code that gets them regular ADA for the time that they're there. You do have to make sure you're following the procedure to chart that the teacher has been with them 2 1-hour visits every 5 school days, okay? The attendance group is what gets you this add-on. The number of days that the student is in the attendance group will get you the add-on that is the per pupil minus 100, that capital outlay. Okay, so you are kind of getting doubly funded. Now, important thing about home hospital. This was designed a long time ago before things such as COVID, virtual learning, other options, okay? So we will tell you if you call us If you have a full-time, let's ask this first. How many in here have a full-time virtual program or school in your district? Okay. Lots of people are starting those in the district. It's great. There's a regulation for it. We can help you set it up. We can help you track it. Make sure you're getting funding for it, okay? If you have a full-time virtual student, they are either a full-time virtual student or they're home hospital. You can give home hospital services virtually, okay? You can service the student, provide instruction virtually to a home hospital student, but a full-time virtual student should not be on home hospital, okay? Is that making sense? Because they're fully virtual anyway. They can do it wherever they are, okay? These students should be getting those two. The reason they get the extra funding is because they are getting the individualized attention from the teacher. The 2 one-hour visits that are just for them to make sure they're staying caught up and getting caught up, okay? That's why a lot of times people say, oh, I have all these home hospital kids. I'm just going to throw them over into my fully virtual. I'm going to throw them over there. You can do that. You can go above and beyond. But if you have a student on home hospital, they have to receive 2 one-hour visits, individual visits from a teacher. They can also start, go into your, join a Google Classroom, join another classroom to interact more. You can always go above and beyond the 2 one-hour visits, but you have to at least hit those. You'll be able to see these students on your SAR report. They should all come out on your NT, not transported. They're not there. Shouldn't receive any transportation while they are in home hospital. Those are transportation codes we'll talk about here in a minute. You can change those. If somebody changes a bus route or if somebody goes on home hospital and then comes back, you can end date that transportation code, make sure you're getting transportation when you are transporting them. This is another one, we don't have a slide on this, but if you do have those fully virtual programs, this is another check that our attendance auditors have started doing on those fully virtual, schools. They should not be having transportation for those students. Okay, LEP, another add-on, one of the ones that has been increasing here lately. Che talked about it. We're hearing some rumblings of maybe splitting this one like the special education population. Sorry, stalled out there just for a minute. These students are what used to be your EL students, English learner. I think they're still labeled maybe as EL on the SAR report, changed a few years ago to LEP. To be identified as LEP in Infinite Campus, these students have to have a home primary language other than English, and they have to have an active EL record with an active service for an instructional accommodation. In Infinite Campus, there's also a lot of other information. There's actually 6 different classifications of these students. I don't work with EL, so I don't know them. It's emerging. It kind of progresses of where you are on the spectrum in your English learning. That's what we're maybe looking into, seeing if this could be, separated in the funding formula. This data will be reported to the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. Okay. Wendy Spalding is their data controller over there. She will be the one who works with your title. I believe it's 3 coordinators. Okay. Title 3 coordinators. I don't think that's on here. Yes, they are the ones. Yes. Title III English Learner Coordinators are the ones who submit this data to KDE. Like everything else in Infinite Campus, there's a report for it. You can check the report, the English Learner Extract. What you're going to do is look at that percent enrolled column, and that is what will be passed over to the SEEK system. So before we talk about transportation, in the big picture, all of this data that comes in on your SAR, all of this data that comes pulled out of Infinite Campus, once it's pulled out and scrubbed and either comes through your SAR submission, through your at-risk submission, whether it goes to our OCIS for EL, December 1 count to the other office, all of that data, once it is scrubbed, it's like we pick it all up and we throw it over, I call it over the wall at KDE, to our group of our SEEK group. We take all of that data and push it into their database. That's then when the money magic happens, okay? That's then when it all gets aggregated together and the actual dollar amount is figured out, okay? That's why, from my perspective, I harp so much on the data, okay? It is what, it's what makes it go, okay? So We're going to go on to transportation now. And this one isn't near as clean in my mind. So Che gets to talk about the hard ones.
So of all the things I do, oh, she stole it. I need the clicker there. Thanks. Of all the things I do, this is probably the one thing I dread the most. And yesterday they started this calculation. A lot of data that goes into this. Seek's really not that complicated. The tax stuff's really not that complicated. This is complicated. Best way to explain it is you are looking at, or this formula rather, is looking at density, which is your number of miles served on your buses and the number of students. The more efficient you are, the better off you are in this formula. And some districts cannot control their efficiency because of geography. We had some friends from Pike County in the room, big county. Buses run a lot down there. They cannot help that. They don't have a choice. So they're not going to be nearly as efficient as JCPS ever, unless we break them up into 20 small districts. The formula also looks at, there's a handicap factor for special ed students that require that type of transportation. Bus purchases, which is still a pretty good deal. There's some depreciation in that formula that gets added back in. So if you buy a bus over a 14-year period, a little bit of interesting history. We were told the reason depreciation even exists was to get the gas buses off the road into diesel. And now, of course, districts are buying more battery and all that. So it's still mostly diesel, though. But there's a 14-year period. You can Google bus inventory, KDE, and look at your own. You can see the depreciation schedule of all your buses, your dailies, your spares. There's a lot of data out there. One of the more interesting things I've sat through is a bus specifications meeting. These people know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. These are your transportation directors. They work very hard to make sure we try to keep our costs down, but at the same time make these buses as safe as possible. The discussion last time when I walked in the room was about LED taillights and how much brighter they were and better for overall transportation of students. Simple thing, but it can have a huge impact. There is a growth adjustment if you're hauling more kids. For example, you've grown and you're hauling more kids, and there's some funding for blind, deaf, and vocational. So one of the things we ran into last budget is sort of a disagreement with mostly the House side, is we calculate transportation this time of year every year. We have to be done by March 1. It takes a while to get it right. And then we provide those numbers to the General Assembly during the budget process. Well, they had fully funded transportation based on the old number. Now, we gave them the new number. They had it, but it's their prerogative to fully fund on the old number, which was fine. We were glad to get what we got. And it's currently funded at 74%. About 2007 or so, or 8, is when all that sort of started slipping and they weren't fully funding it. And I will tell you, when you look at the dollar amounts involved, that difference between 274 million and 484, that's on your shoulders as a district. That's a lot of money. So the more they put into that, it loosens up your general fund. We're very, very happy for that. For as long as I can remember, the Kentucky Board of Education and obviously superintendents, finance, everybody's lobbied hard for fully funding transportation. I think that's one thing that I would say, as they increase that funding, we're all going to be much, much happier for it. So very glad to see them do that. I want to give them proper credit. That was a lot of money they put into it. And I think next year it even goes up again. But one thing to pay attention to, if you look at your own district, independents are a little different. I saw my friends from Jenkins in here somewhere. Their transportation numbers are going to look very different than, Knott counties or Pike or Pikeville. That spreadsheet, there's really 2 interesting columns on there. If you go out and Google it, there'll be one about calculated cost per pupil day. So every day, what's it cost you to haul a student? And it might say $4.30. And you look at this next column, it says graph adjusted costs. Well, that's where we sort of squeeze everybody into the party. And if you're efficient, you're going to get more on the graph adjusted costs. If you're a little less efficient, you'll get less. And there's usually some consistency there. It's looking at some linear regressive thing and it squeezes it all in. But there are things you can do to help your efficiency. Routes, obviously, review those every so often, as well as, the way you buy your buses and your labor costs and things like that. When we came out of COVID, the cost really shot up. I mean, we used to be at like 350 million. We're now at 484. I think I looked yesterday, we're at 518 or something. So it's still going up quite a bit. And a lot of that's labor cost, of course, trying to keep our drivers. So you can do everything you want to do and try to be efficient, but there's obviously a limitation. You can't control, where the kids are living. We always tell districts, review your routes, do your best. And, beyond that, it's just geography. Western Kentucky, it's flat. Here it's not. And that's, you're going to have wear and tear down here that they'll never experience. JCPS, you'd have to be kind of nuts to drive a school bus on the Waterston Expressway, and they do it. But, they do a lot of stop, go up there. So their problems are going to be a little bit different. Transportation data. Again, if you notice the T codes here, like grade 9, previous year, those kids are going to fall into grade 10 in the current year. That's what you're really looking for. There's nothing really on here, but if you notice, grade 11, 12,040, that's an aggregate number, but it drops, it's like cut in half the next year. Well, that's pretty normal. They're going to get their license and never ride the bus again. But if those are third graders, you don't want them to have a license. They're too short. So you need to stop and go back and look at your codes. Again, your attendance clerk and Infinite Campus does this thing where it resets a student. So, they need to go back in, recode every year. We finally figured that out because we thought, why do we have all these non-transported kids? Well, that's why, because they fall into NT. And that
jump in real quick.
Yeah.
All right. And one of the things to make sure you look at is when we see those third graders and whatnot hopping around and, Che talks about the things you can't account for, your routes and whatnot. We encourage, you've taken me back a slide. Thanks. We encourage every districts to look at this twice a year, at least minimum, beginning of the year. And then once you come back after Christmas to make sure you maybe pick up anybody who's come in or whatnot. Another big issue we see is those, if you don't have a T code, it's going to default to that NT. So a lot of times the problems are when kids are moving schools, right? It doesn't roll right in the system. Like if you have a bunch of fifth graders who are leaving an elementary school and going to this middle school over there, make sure, or if you have multiple middle schools and you're sending some here and, make sure all of that stuff is rolling at the beginning of the year. And then make sure you're following up, at the, after the first of the year, calendar year, January, there's lots of movement we know over Christmas, but also make sure you're trying to catch up on things such as home hospital, EHOs, virtual kids who have pulled back into in person. You want to make sure you're checking those codes. A lot of times we'll go in and talk to transportation directors and they're like, oh, we keep it over here. We don't even look at that. There needs to be some type of connection between, transportation directors, and a lot of times do a really good job knowing who's on their bus. Make sure that translates to knowing who's on that bus in Infinite Campus, because that's where that comes from. And I will not talk about levied equivalent rates.
Yeah, it's great. This is why I went to college, to talk about levied equivalent rates. But there's a couple things we use this for, but one of the more interesting things you can use it for, if you go out, look at our tax spreadsheet, about this time, strangely enough, we still have people that have not finished up their tax rates because of elections and stuff like that. But you can actually sort this number, and it will give you sort of a comparative tool to see where you land as far as, comparing to your neighbors or across the state. So this is basically assessment divided by your tax revenue. It gives you this rate. It's everything. So if you do utility, but your neighbor doesn't, this helps kind of compare and contrast, if you will. Pretty handy little tool, especially if you're on the lower end of this. You're trying to prove that, hey, we're really low. But now if you're really high, you may not show them that, but it is what it is. This also determines your district's level of participation in Tier 1. At this point, everybody, again, that was something the General Assembly increased to, is that Tier 1 funding. And that came kind of at the last minute, really unexpectedly. But this maximum Tier 1 weight, levied equivalent rate, will kind of play into that as well. Property assessment, again, we talked about this a lot. I'm not going to belabor this, but, if you've got something going on in your community, get to know your PVA, look around you. If you see things going on, they're building, there's a new Walmart going in, there's whatever's going on, pay attention to that because it can impact your bottom line. Basically, every million's 3,000 less than SEEK, but it also impacts your equalization. And if you, I know everyone loves these big battery plants, but they typically will get a big tax break as well. And the schools are supposed to be held harmless, and I'm here to tell you sometimes it doesn't quite happen that way. So be leery of economic development, be happy with it that the jobs are there, but protect your district. They'll want everything. And remember, your other businesses have been paying taxes for years. Again, per pupil, this assessment is a good number to look at too. So we determined that statewide equalization amount. If you're a district that's over that on your per pupil assessment, you get no equalization, no tier one. Jefferson, Fayette, Boone, Kenton, I think Kenton's close, Campbell, but Anchorage is by far the highest. They're way up there. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to get more equalization and more tier one funding because of that. So this is just talking a little bit about the local effort. Your tax rate, 30 cents of that comes right back to the state through that subtraction in the formula. No other taxing entity has that. Your cities, counties, health departments, conservation, whatever you got, libraries, they don't have local effort. You all do. So when people come to you and say, why are your tax rates so high? Point to that. It's not your fault. 30 cents of that comes back. So that's, that tied to that property assessment as well. And it's kind of it's a hard thing to explain that, yes, on your tax bill is a 70-cent tax bill, but you all will not see all of that. So that's really important to explain to your board members as well. The nickels, see quite a few districts in here that nickels have really changed the district. Of course, Menifee was one that we worked with. Breathitt, which we said he was nuts. I sat in the room. I will never forget that day. He came on the line and said, we're going to try for that nickel. We hit mute, and we're like, he's not going to get that nickel. And he got it. Very proud of him, very proud of that district. It's a hard road. Commissioner Fletcher will be happy to tell you all about his struggles in Lawrence County, but it is well worth it in the end. We are hopeful at some point, and I know I'm going to say last week or two, maybe even been before Christmas, Commissioner Fletcher had talked to our Superintendent's Advisory Committee about starting the conversation about, not just nickels, but facilities funding. It's gotten extremely expensive to build. It's probably not going to go down. Districts have put their neck out. Johnson County doubled down on the nickel. Those of you that don't have it, if you try to get it and you get, beat up over it, you can't do anything. And to think about the projects that are on these DFPs that we see that you all update, there's no way to pay for that need. So we're trying to maybe get I think, at least a small fire started to talk about facilities funding, what other states are doing, what's working, what's not. Frankly, the nickels just don't keep up with the cost. It's hard to do. We have small independents. They just don't have the math isn't there to help them build a new school. Renovations probably, but to build a new one's really difficult. So pay attention. That's probably going to be a topic eventually with the General Assembly, hopefully, and to get some input from not only you all, but our fiscal agents, our construction companies, and everybody to understand how can we do this a little more efficiently and a little better. And it's a hard ask. When you go to your taxpayers and say, we need 2 of these nickels, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars, but we get equalized. Dr. Tarvin over there and I've worked on, I don't know how many districts have proposed to do it. And I used to joke because we'd say, man, we don't think they're going to be successful, and they'd get it no problem. And the ones you think, oh, they've done a great job of, marketing it, public comes out and kills it. You just never know. It's really a roll of the dice. Again, this is just a breakdown of your taxes about this new Tier 1, 17.5%. That generates quite a bit of money. That was a nice thing the General Assembly did, was throw some more money in that pot for districts. So when we talk, someone up here earlier mentioned occupational tax. This is just how it's broken out. Most districts do this utility tax. It's up to 3%. A handful do occupational, not many. Now for school districts, that occupational tax only applies to those who live and work in the community. That's a constitutional issue. Cities, however, like Frankfort, if you work in Frankfort, you pay it no matter where you're from. They get Jesse's money, basically. She comes from outside. Excise, nobody does this. That's basically on personal tax liability. It's a little deep into the weeds of tax stuff. So aircraft and watercraft, the aircraft is pretty self-explanatory, but watercraft is actually, these are your Coast Guard registered boats, the big ones. If you're along a river, the lakes, of course, quite a few of these larger boats. There was an article in the paper a couple years ago where they had trouble assessing these, and it's kind of an interesting history. But some of I want to say Union County maybe, they used to get some pretty healthy sized checks off of, I think it was coal barges, if I remember correctly. So that's something to look at, and this is something that your board can sort of opt in or opt out of. If you're not doing it and you want to or want to look into it, let us know. We'll look at the details of it. So the nickels, again, most districts, everybody does this facility support program. There's equalization, which is sort of the game changer. You're putting in your money, and it's not a match, but it's a formula-driven equalization that can help really push your bonding potential. So what you get locally plus that, any SFCC offers, the kind of the total package. And it's a big win for a district if you can get a nickel or two. I know Johnson was doing a high school, and those nickels basically, no pun intended, paved the way for that. Without it, there's no new high school. And as we hopefully some of us aren't in this business till we fall over, we're trying to leave things in better shape. This is the way you do it for facilities. Sometimes these will get recalled. You'll have a petition, go through that process. There's a few court cases out there. JCPS had one not terribly long ago. Henderson County. So there's a little bit of legal framework, but there's still some gray areas, and you could be challenged. If there's a little bit of a tricky thing we do where we do this outside of tax season, so you're not having to, rush the bills out the door. And that sometimes will help because people are not paying too close attention. I'm glad this is being recorded when I said that. But if you have questions on it, it gets very granular and detailed. So don't hesitate to call. We'll set up a call. Even if your board members just want to look into it, we'll be happy to kind of walk them through the process. So these are the existing nickels, but the only one you can really get now is that middle one, the recallable. The rest of them are sort of dormant. Facility support program, that one everybody does. And then growth nickel, there's a period of time where they say if you're growing and you do all these things, we'll give you this nickel. And Oldham County was really, I think, the impetus behind that. Same thing with second growth, equalized facility funding. Base realignment and closure was actually about Fort Knox in Hardin County. The feds were doing some of that where they shut down certain bases or expand. And so that was to help Hardin County kind of adjust to that. And then Category 5, and this impacted 10 or 11 districts. That was they were trying to tackle about 10 or 11 of the worst buildings in the state. And this was to address that need. Tier 1, again, this is that extra pot of money. You'll see it in your SEEK formula. Most districts get this. There's a handful that don't. And it's a nice pot of money for most districts. But as long as your tax base is pretty healthy and you're collecting 17.5% of the SEEK number, you generate another bucket of money from the state for that. And if you think of it, it's kind of the carrot at the end of the stick to keep your boards from just cratering your tax rates. Whoops. That's scary. Okay. So, yeah, I'm just going to skip this. I don't really want to talk about it now that we have a shortfall coming. So a couple of weeks ago, usually a little bit before Christmas, we start crunching a lot of numbers to determine fall growth comes in, and we're trying to figure out, how close we are at the end of, a couple months in advance. And it's an estimate because we're still getting data in. We don't have January growth. That doesn't come to us till February 20th. We've got all the property assessment stuff. It's a pretty firm number, but it's not quite firm. It's kind of jello, if you will. So typically, we will go and notify the commissioner. He really enjoys you coming up on Friday afternoon and giving him bad news. I can tell you that. I'm kind of infamous for that. I like to wait till Fridays and then say I'm going home. And what happens is our estimates were under, and we estimate, I'll say 7 or 8 things with the state economists long in advance, property assessments, ADA that we talked about. But they were probably a little short. Unexpected growth factor gets us sometimes. Many, many years ago, if you all remember, we had a hellacious flu outbreak. everybody was really sick. Kids were out of school forever. Districts closed. So that's a low attendance year in the fall. Well, then the next year, everybody's healthy, and that cratered my numbers because there was all of a sudden growth. Now, that's not new kids. That's kids that weren't there in the last fall. All of a sudden are healthy. So I would call districts and say, please get your kids and send them home. This is going to blow up my budget. So that's what happens is, all of a sudden you have all these kids. And it's not new kids necessarily. It can be, I was absent and now I'm here. So that's usually what pushes it. Sometimes our estimates are just off if we didn't expect, where we were short this year. We were in pretty good shape on property assessments. Exceptional was short. LEP was short. Trying to remember where else. ADA, we were a little short on that too. So overall, there's some other complicated buckets of money, but the General Assembly gives us and has given us authority to kind of use all of our budget units to fill that hole, except sometimes that's not enough. So that's when we go to the state budget director. Basically, you start knocking on doors. You let them know first because we're in the executive branch. Those are the governor's people. We'll say, hey, here's what we think our shortfall is. They'll kind of look around and say, we got it or we don't. Sometimes they need the authority of the General Assembly, who just happens to be in town right now. And we will notify the General Assembly as well. As I'm sitting up here, I'm checking my phone to make sure we don't get messages from them because they'll say, what's going on, or can you explain this, or where did Chase screw up? And I say, it wasn't me, it was Jesse, not my fault. And I'll go with, I'll forward her the email, but we want to stay in contact with them. So right now it's really three things. We have really three options: do nothing, and we're probably going to have about a $12 to $13 million shortfall, which isn't huge. In context, it's probably less than 1% of SEEK. But any shortfall means a cut in your budget. And that's what we try like hell to avoid. There's nothing that makes me crazier than having to talk to you about shortfalls. I hate it. The other word, excess, I love talking about that because it's easy. We have some money left over. The General Assembly is going to take it, but I don't have to do anything in SEEK. We're good. So option 2 is to fund the statutorily necessary stuff in SEEK, and that would be 12, 13 million bucks, we think. And then option 3 is there's some stuff on top of that that's not statutorily required, mostly property assessment driven, and they only pay it if funds are available. That's in the neighborhood of $40 million in total. So we have already talked to General Assembly, and we'll kind of keep that conversation going. And there'll be more information coming out. Like I said, yesterday they started calculating transportation. That's part of this equation too. And we'll get more exact numbers. And then I'm hopeful that next week, and we're on the road a little bit, I think next week or week after, I can't remember, that we'll have a little bit more specific information for your district to say, if this happens, this is what you can expect. So you all can hopefully plan ahead. Yes, sir.
NTI days, if everybody around the state is doing that, the attendance on those days is probably going to be 100%.
Right.
And now, they look at, if we get 10 of those in every district across the state does 10, that's 100% for 10 days.
Yep.
Situation.
That will hit me next year. But to your point, where our attendance percentages were a little low last year, coming back off of COVID, getting kids in school, they've improved, and that costs part of this too. So we want those, rears and seats, of course, but if attendance is too good, and I remember talking to Tim about, remember the clawback in the ADA if you lost students, and I told him, make sure if you're close, tell those kids to go home for a minute so you can get that loss again. But jokingly, of course, we didn't do that. I didn't kidnap their kids to keep them from getting ADA, but the attendance can really drive that too, that it can cost a little bit. Now, it's not, a 2% increase is not $100 million. It's really not that much. But NTI does play into that because you're replacing those days with, 100%. No, go ahead.
No.
Uh-oh.
We're not replacing with 100%. So remember, with your NTI days, what you're replacing with is last year's ADA. Okay? So we can give you, and herein lies the problem with what's going on right now. Sidebar. A lot of people are saying, especially when we went to Southeast South Central, they had the 75
London shooter.
The London shooter shenanigans. that they had to use some NTI days very early. Okay. They used them in September, October. And now we've had a harder winter and they're saying I'm running short on them. And a lot of times people don't understand why, just throw me some more NTI days. Well, that is a huge change in the system. That's a big change because we're coded to take 10. Okay. Because the system is coded to take your previous year's ADA and replace it for that day. So if today is an NTI day in my district, it's today the 22nd, I'm not looking back to the 22nd, January 22nd last year and getting that ADA. I'm getting last year's overall ADA and replacing it for January 22nd this year, okay? You can do that up to 10 times. So first thing is it's not 100%, it's what last year's ADA was. This is one of the problems we had coming off of COVID, okay? So first year we came off of COVID, everybody's attendance was just in the gutter, right? It was awful. So that year, the next year when you started using your NTI days, we had a handful of districts call and say, I don't want to use an NTI day. It's not going to be to my benefit. I'm like, you don't have to. You don't have to use an NTI day. We have a lot of people on our instructional staff who encourage you to have a traditional snow day, add that to the end, get that instruction back going, because what you were doing in that situation was you were taking the day off and replacing with a really, really bad, sometimes 85% number from the previous year. Okay. So that's a little of what's going on with NTI. So. Mm-hmm.
We did use some NTI days. We also went back, but we were told by legislators, don't worry about it, do what's best for your district. So
Right.
We're still waiting. I mean, basically, we had growth in our district, but it hurt the growth. When we went back those 2 days, we were at 70%. We had to count those.
Toward growth,
so
yeah.
We're still waiting on.
Well, and we have a lot of districts who are calling us because if they tell us, if they say they get 5 more NTI days, we break out the paper and pencil and figure out how to manually calculate it. We do. But a lot of times people will call us and say, these were extenuating circumstances. Can't you just give me 2 more NTI days? We can't until the legislature, makes that decision and says, yes, here's who gets these days and here's, what happens. Okay. So it's 10 by law right now. During COVID, they went and opened it up and said as many as you want. Right. And we figured out because we had a handful of districts who took 35 that year. Right. That first year of COVID, most of the state froze their funding that year. I think we had 12 districts who filed a SAR that year with, my memory is a long time ago, 32 to 36 NTI days. Okay. And so what that did was that impacted their data, but it also impacted everybody else's, because then we got into the fact that everybody's like, well, everything's frozen. Why is my number not the same as last year? Well, because we had 12 districts, and like Che talked about, in transportation and everything, those NTI days, you're not transporting, so that's going to affect your efficiency, everything down through there. When we throw all that into transportation, everything leans on everybody again. The numbers get moved around a little bit. That's why it's so hard when they come to us across the river and say, so we give them 2 more NTI days, what's it going to do? It could do a lot, or it could not. How many is everybody using them? Is 171 getting 2 more days? Or some, so it's hard to pin down where that's going to go.
Do we know how many they're talking about? Have y'all heard?
15
extra NTI days.
Oh,
I
I've
don't know.
heard 50, the total of 15, so
Yeah.
5 more. That was from the commissioner's office, I think.
Right.
This week or last week? This week,
Right.
I think.
So, and we've heard that he's in support of that, but still have to get that passed through over there before we can make it happen.
So like I said, prior to all this, we sent out a survey, and some of you all may have answered it, but what we wanted to do, and we'd mentioned this to Commissioner Fletcher, is get a little bit of feedback to take back to our board as well about, what we call weaknesses in the formula and concerns everybody has. And I know from working with, some of you all over the years, Regionally, you all are going to have some different issues. I know unmined minerals was for a little bit. We worked through that. Losing students is so far, I think, across the state's been one of the concerns, and that's seems to be, now we haven't been to Northern Kentucky yet, but they're growing a little bit, but it's not like it used to be. I mean, it used to be, I could tell you within 2 or 3 districts how many districts are going to grow. Jessamine, Fayette, Jefferson, Woodford was growing. Shelby still grows a little bit, but it's really changed. Our state dynamic has. However, with a lot of economic development across the state, that hopefully will change a little bit. So, statewide issues, declining ADA and absenteeism, that's not a big shocker. And none of this is going to keep you up at night. Teacher pay. I just saw Indiana 2 days ago is trying to bump their minimum up. That came to us in so many different ways during session last time. Do it this way, do it that way. And it would have created some compression in the middle of your teachers. But I think that issue will keep popping up in front of either the governor's office or General Assembly. Transportation funding, retaining drivers and not fully funded. The driver issue is everywhere. I have yet to talk to a district that says we have plenty of drivers. Increased property values. Now, this is going to be more regionally, I think, up north in, your Boone, Kenton, Campbell, that triangle, Fayette. But as that market cools off a little bit, there's that adjustment period. And if it really craters like it did about 2008, we have kind of the opposite problem. These homes are just too expensive for people to buy, so they don't flip and they don't transition into, that type of high property assessment. Increased cost. Not a lot we can do there, just inflation. Utility bills. We heard in the interim a couple of months ago from insurance companies, and we heard from quite a few districts that all this liability insurance, property insurance is going through the roof, which didn't really surprise us, especially Western Kentucky and Tornado Alley over there. Sorry about that. A lot of the same, except number 4 and number 5. Teacher pay, transportation, owed facilities, and building repairs. And again, want to emphasize that is soon to be a topic in front of the Superintendent's Advisory Committee. You can probably catch it online, I'm guessing. Are you still on that? Are you? Okay. And Tim, you're on that too, right? Okay. But, you'll start hearing some grumbling out of Frankfort about it. And I think we'll probably talk a lot more about that in upcoming months. I think the commissioner has probably experienced it himself and talked to enough superintendents and board members, et cetera, to understand it. It's not a small problem, nor is it a localized problem. It's everywhere. Districts trying to, even buy property, it's getting pretty tough. Wherever Jenkins is at in here. My friends in Jenkins had an opportunity to buy some property, which I hope by now is a done deal. It's not. How long ago did we start talking about that? September. And some of these properties, they're perfect. Everything's perfect, except it's not perfect. Or there's some delay, or there's something. Cost sometimes. Districts can only spend basically the appraisal value given 5 or 10%. That's a constitutional issue. Or give or take 5%. We have had some districts, we had one trying to pick up a piece of property and the seller just was not interested. He wanted to move a lot quicker than they could. And it's just tough. If you're trying to do a campus, unless you're out in the middle of a cornfield in, Graves County, it's hard to do. There's just not enough land. But even renovations and just keeping your buildings, kind of up to date, it's a struggle. I've had a lot of districts call, usually, and they'll say, we have a piece of property that if we don't pick it up, it's going to be the miss of the year, So the property is one part. It's a long, long process. And then there's not a lot there. You've got to have roadway adequacy. You got to jump through a lot of hoops to get it free and clear title, of course. Worse than any mortgage process I've ever seen. But there's a reason for a lot of those rules. But then the construction process and House Bill 678, which was a few sessions ago, and now we have House Bill 727. That's the one that if your board opted to operate under that, KD is not reviewing. those plans for your facilities. We still do the DFP. That sped up a lot of stuff, and it helped. We think there's some things they could do to make that permanent, as well as do a few other things in there that would help this process a whole lot. I'll be real honest with you. I don't miss those reviews. It would take, I mean, you all dealt with it in some cases. You would submit your BG to facilities. It could take weeks upon weeks to get their approval. If they got backed up, it was, we're, like I said, pretty thinly staffed. So now they focus a lot on the district facility plans, which is, it's a tough process too. A lot of community input, and it takes, upwards of 9 months, I think. So we always recommend, if you're not familiar with facilities, call us and we'll talk you through a lot of it, especially newer superintendents trying to get their, sea legs together. I don't know if many of you all know Jim Masters that's at Henry County, but he and I went to high school together, actually live in his parents' old home. But he said, all this stuff I do as a superintendent was pretty easy till I got to facilities. And he had an oil pipeline running through a piece of property that he needed to buy, and a high pressure oil pipeline. And there's a whole different set of rules for that. The tax increases down here, this is any district. JCPS runs into that. They catch a lot of grief if they increase taxes. I think strategy is a good thing, and knowing, I used to laugh, I'm not going to tell you what district this was, I'll never give them up, but each year their board would quietly select someone to be against the tax increase while the others were for it. So they would do that in a cycle. And he said, if you look back, you'd see every other year, this one guy was always against it. So when he would go to his voters, I was against it, so don't beat me up. And I thought, you guys have figured out the game. But, they were able to pick up that 4% every once in a while. And sometimes if your assessment goes the right direction, you can pick it up and your tax rates are a little bit lower. I know I'm going to pick on Greg Kahn for a minute. The years that unmined minerals sank, tax rates went through the roof. Let's see, Leslie, Pike, you all, quite a few in this region. There's no board on this planet that could easily do that. And we were very concerned in Frankfort. It's been a long time ago. This is back when Commissioner Pruitt was at KDE. And it was really one of the first challenges that got put in front of him. And I remember the day we found out these rates are going to go through the roof, and it's hard for people to pay it. As we learned at Jefferson County in a meeting, they had some very smart people figure out and they don't have utility tax, if they had added that, they have one zip code that statistically they would have had a 30% increase in utility shutoffs in that one zip code. So that told us that, these tax rates do mean something to people. That extra 20, 30 bucks a month may hit people at the wrong time, people that can't afford it. So we always say, get your community input, do those hearings, know your community and what they can tolerate, of course. It's a tough sell. Any year it's a tough sell. So has anyone got any questions? I'm trying to say clock. Comments, questions?
What the percentage of total state budget that is invested in P12 public education and how it's changed over the years?
Not how it's changed over the years. I mean, we could pull it up on our budget documents. But to give you an idea, I think just only SEEK stuff, I think we're running, and facilities money that's in there is about 2.7 billion. And you factor in locals, I think I had that slide, I can go back. I think it's like 3 billion. Oh, excuse me for just a second. It's way back here somewhere. Nope. There. So we used to get this when Governor Bevin, if you recall, they dumped a bunch of money in the pension fund. That's the other part that's, to me, it's not really included. So if you want to count that, it depends on how you want to, make meatloaf, if you want to include that or not. I think if you go and Google revenues and expenditures, KDE, there's mountain of spreadsheets that go back many, many, many years that track all this. And it'll have local, state, and federal, and you can easily pull it right off of there and plop it in another spreadsheet. But I can tell you just out of boredom, I went back and looked to see, like, locally, how much that's increased over time. And that's something to see. It really is. The state's done what the state does, of course, but the local side's really increased. Like the share of it's really gotten a lot larger over time. Very clearly a lot larger over time. And that's something we'll talk to KSBA about when we go up there in later February, I think. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
The comment earlier about no tuition being charged, so it's illegal for school districts to charge any tuition to students now?
Is my general counsel in the room? No. Todd Allen here? No, he's not. So the department, I believe, if I recall correctly, our lawyers looked into that and they didn't believe it was constitutional for, K through 12 public schools to charge tuition. However, right down the street, we know Frankfort Independent was doing it. We know other districts have done it for as long as time has been around. And I don't really know if there was really
So that also has to deal with, there's kind of a caveat too, because I think and correct me if I go off rail here, those are for students who generate SEEK dollars. So like, there's always been that side group of students who are coming in from out of state. If you're pulling in students from out of state, they're not generating SEEK dollars because SEEK dollars cannot be paid for out of state kids. So that's kind of like a difference. So when we start talking about this, you got to we have to be very careful about what we say because it's, students who are generating state dollars should not have tuition.
So if I jump to Pikeville from Pike County, the tax dollars aren't following me. It's just the SEEK dollars would eventually. So it's a slippery slope because if you're a district that has a lot of out of your district kids, you're missing out on that tax revenue. And that's what the tuition is there to sort of offset, I would assume anyway. Anyone else? Awful quiet. Yeah.
Che, one of the budget, or not the budget, but as far as the shortfall in this area, of course, is attendance and declining attendance. Every district in here, we're a little bit fortunate. We have had a growth, but it's just because our attendance rate went up. Is there talk about what to do as far as with the SEEK formula to address that? What would it take to make that change become effective? Because I know we can only lay off so many people. We still have buildings we have to operate.
Yeah.
We have buses we have to run. And once we get to a point to where the attendance continues to decline or enrollment continues declining, what are some things that are being done to address that issue? Because that's a big priority in this area.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question because a couple years ago, the conversation started about average daily membership, which taken us off of this attendance-driven thing. So Representative Tipton, who's out of Spencer, Anderson, and another county, I can't remember which one. It's not Nelson, I can't recall, but he sort of had a SEEK task force for a little bit, and then that sort of spun off of that. So average daily membership was mentioned a few times, and I think there's some genuine interest in it. And we were asked to kind of look at it, and it's a number we already collect, and it's a little more about with ADA, you still have to build and staff for kids who there and not there. It doesn't matter. You still have to have that staff, and you've got to heat your building and have the electric on and all that. So there was certainly a good argument for it. The only catch that we saw was how do you incentivize attendance? And, we were telling them, well, you could do an extra bucket of money. You could do a million different things to incentivize attendance. But at the same time, that's what we kind of argued. It's funding a system, meaning I'm going to fund your building, your staff that's there that you have to have instead of, 85% of it because, you have kids that aren't there. I think there's probably some gasoline behind that eventually. And looking at what Tennessee did, they sort of switched theirs around a little bit. And I think it works. We were on a call with them, and I think it works pretty well in that state. And, I don't know where Commissioner Fletcher, I know I think he was pretty pro ADM back when he was a superintendent because I think he saw the kind of the writing on the wall. There's also, I think, an academic argument that that average daily attendance actually is more punitive toward less wealthy districts and more urban districts. It's kind of that, you know, if the kids aren't there, you're going to get penalized for it. But you all know better than I do, getting kids in that room, it can be a challenge, putting it lightly, if not impossible. So a question I asked one day is it easier to change Seek incrementally, one thing at a time, like tier one, or is it easier to do it all at once? I would say the way our processes work, we'd have to do it one thing at a time, which same result, it would just take longer. I really think we're ready to go to that ADM model though. It's just a matter of getting, I think, the General Assembly on board and kind of understanding the ins and outs of it. Yeah, yeah. And it would look a little different. And one thing we talked about as far as the work on your DPPs, which they have plenty, you're still going to have to take attendance. There's still a security issue of you need to know who's in your building, et cetera. That's not going to go away, but I think we figured it might be a little less work on DPPs, maybe.
I think it would be to pull in and track them on that attendance. It's just, we're going to have to get some traction because, you know, it's a whole new set of rules. Because, you know, you've got a half day, whole day right now, that's what you're counting on. And so when you move to ADM, you know, now we have primary and secondary enrollments. And one of the questions we've been dealing with this week from somewhere else, I don't remember if it came from across the river, is what's a full-time enrollment? Well, you know, we don't necessarily determine that X number of hours is a full-time enrollment. We fund you, if you have a primary and a secondary enrollment, you know, if I go to this district for 50% of the day and this district 50% of the day, you know, that's easy to split with attendance. I send you 50% of it and you know, there's going to have to be some definitions and some changing that everyone has to agree upon if it moves to ADM of what is a membership, because that is a lot easier to, it's a lot easier to double count a membership for the way we work with ATCs and, you know, other schools that come in and, you know, you may let somebody come to your district to take a class, you know, that they don't offer. So there's a lot of things that just need to be outlined and thought through so that we don't, you know, double fund a large portion of students. So.
Oh,
Every day.
yeah.
Whether the kid rides the bus or not, would that also affect that funding as well?
Yeah. So transportation, it's a different onion. You'd have to peel a little differently, but I think Representative Tipton had even asked us, you know, and he's now, I don't think he's on the K through 12 committees. I think he's on post-secondary, but he was very interested in how things worked. But he also kind of, I think, challenged us to figure out a different way to do transportation because it is very involved and it's convoluted. And, you know, you can sit down with it and read through it and you keep looking at it. It still probably won't make a whole lot of sense. And we talked about kind of along the same lines with facilities. You got to have them. So those buses, if they're half full, or empty, you all will always run routes, or, you know, especially counties and most independents. There's a handful of districts that don't transport. And you're not required to do it, but let's be frank, if you want the kids in school, you're required to do it. It's not going to go away. So I think that's probably a bit more of a challenge to get them to change. But I think that average daily membership for T codes could be great. And I'll tell you all kind of a funny story. We got dinged by the Office of Education Accountability. They were looking at the way we were, you know, interpreting the transportation formula. And one thing they said was, well, if a kid's a T1, it's over a mile, you know, both ways to and from school. I was like, sure. Well, you all are giving them the route and we think it's a straight line, like as the crow flies. And that's like, well, buses don't really travel as the crow flies. And we had to have a meeting about how mileage works and how buses work. They're generally on streets. And we had to argue this with them that it's not a straight from here, you know, over the mountain and down in the valley. That's not how you all transport. So I think all that minutia of tracking how far and how long that kid's on, it's a great effort and it's a lot of work, but is it worth it in the end to say you're still transporting them? You've got a cost no matter what. And I'd say if you're an independent, you know, your cost is your cost. If you're a county, your cost is your cost. There's not a whole lot you can do.
And I would think on that ADM topic, if it was to transition, that would be one of the pieces that would have to transition early. You know, like Chase said, it's going to have to be done. If we're doing, you know, seek changes, it's going to have to be in chunks. But I think it would have to move to an ADM at least once we got that definition of ADM, because that definition would impact that also. Excuse me. Then if you wanted to go further and look into the transportation definition, then that may be a second, third, something tier of fixing that. But I think it wouldn't make sense to change ADA to ADM, but leave, you know, because that's double tracking and trying to, you know, but once again, it's down in the weeds of all of that data. We have to have all of those. Everybody has to understand what they're signing off on, right? And what the change is, and that all the definitions that it goes into play.
Anyone else? Oh, one more. Mhm. We had two back-to-back.
Before I got there, so he couldn't blame those on
Yeah,
me.
I could blame that. It was all on us. I'm going to say 40 plus million and then 50 plus million. If you go on the SEEK page, if you go down to those years, it'll say SEEK shortfall by district. It'll be a spreadsheet, and that'll tell you. And it's not very difficult to do the math backwards to say what would 13, 14 million look like. Generally speaking, it's your percentage of SEEK that determines how much comes out. So if you're Jefferson, I think they're like 2.3 something percent. We're going to apply that to the shortfall roughly. There's some weird math in there, but that's pretty much how it works. Yeah, and then do who gets what on the percentage, and then you sort of apply that to the shortfall. Yep. So if you're 0.82% of the total calculated base SEEK, it'll give you a ballpark of roughly what it is. I can tell you in 2 years that 40 and 50 million was awful. It was a lot on districts. I think that was post ERA funds, maybe, if I recall correctly. Not a good time.
You already have that, or is that something I need to, okay.
Yeah, we don't have it yet. We'll have some. So we're running SEEK final. We're trying to run it 3-4 weeks early, but we're still waiting on some stuff. It's really hard to do it this time of year because we don't have all the data. So we're trying to patch it together as it's on the tracks. But the minute we've got something, we'll send it out to everybody because we know y'all got to say, well, this is nothing, or this is something we need to cut, or, you know, make a decision on. Of course,
I mean, do you already have what the percentage is of that each?
no, it's just go to like SEEK tentative, the recent one, and just go to that last column. You should be able to do it about 30 seconds. It'll tell you your percentage. Anybody else? Well, I want to thank Jerry Green, who he and I go back a ways, way back, and appreciate you all coming today. It's a great crowd. My associate, Matt Ross, sent me a message and said he's sorry he couldn't make it. He's been trying to go to these, but we're getting pulled in a lot of different directions, and the media wanted to talk to him. I was like, yeah, Matt, you can deal with that. I'll go to KVAC and hang out down there and eat fried chicken. And we do appreciate you all so much. We're going to try to keep coming out more often. And, you know, even if we come down here and talk about the dreaded facilities process or something, we want to get out more often now that we're able to and see you all. Appreciate everything you all do. If you need anything, contact Jesse or I. Thank you all.